In 1812, Philip and Tina Jasper were slaves on a plantation in Fluvanna County, Virginia. They were godly Christian people, and Philip was a well-known Baptist preacher. Tina was expecting their 24th child, and as she carried their baby in her womb, she prayed, if he was a boy, that God would make him a preacher like his daddy. 2 months before the baby was due, Philip suddenly died. On July 4th, 1812, their baby boy was born. Tina's friend suggested she name the boy Philip after his daddy, but Tina decided instead to name her son John, after the Apostle John. John Jasper grew up learning about Jesus from his mother as he endured the impossible hardships of slavery. When John was 22, he met an 18-year-old young lady named Elvie who was a slave on another plantation, and they married that same night. Their rendezvous was discovered, and they were accused of trying to escape. John's new bride, Elvie, was moved to the Deep South, and John was sold to a tobacco factory in Richmond. Eventually, John got word that Elvie had remarried. The fact that God would allow this to happen made John very angry, and he spent the next few years in bitterness and wickedness. Then in 1839, when John was 26 years old, working 16-hour days in the tobacco factory, he came under powerful conviction of his sinful condition. For 6 weeks, John carried the burden of thinking there was no hope for him. On July 4th, 1839, John's 27th birthday, as he was working in the tobacco factory in Richmond, John cried out to God for mercy, and he put his faith in Jesus for his salvation. John recalled, "The darkness of death was in my soul that morning. My sins were piled on me like mountains. I flung up to heaven a cry for mercy. Before I knew it, the light broke. I was light as a feather. My feet were on the mountain. Salvation rolled like a flood through my soul, and I felt as though I could knock off the factory roof with my shouts." John spotted a woman in the factory who had been praying for him, and he walked over to whisper in her ear that he had just gotten saved. But instead of whispering, he shouted it so that everyone in that part of the factory could hear him. This caused the entire factory floor to erupt in shouting and singing praises to God. The supervisor walked in and told them to get back to work. But right behind him came the owner of the factory, Sam Hargrove. When Mr. Hargrove called John Jasper into his office and asked him what all the ruckus was about, John told him that he had just gotten saved. Sam Hargrove stood up from his desk, reached out and shook John's hand and told him, "John, I wish you mighty well. Your Savior is mine, and we are brothers in the Lord." That was the first time a white man had ever shaken John's hand. Hargrove gave John the rest of the day off, encouraging him to go out and tell everybody he could that he had gotten saved. That same day, John surrendered to preach. Soon after, John was baptized at the First African Baptist Church in Richmond, and 30 days later, the church licensed him to preach. John was a very energetic preacher, and he drew large crowds wherever he preached. He couldn't read, but he preached from the Bible passages that were in his heart. A pastor in Richmond urged him to learn the Bible better, so John began to let a fellow slave teach him to read and write. Within 6 months, John Jasper was reading and studying the Bible for himself. He was often asked to preach the funerals of other slaves, and he was invited to speak at meetings held on plantations throughout the state. He was still working 16-hour days at the tobacco factory and preaching whenever and wherever he had the opportunity. After the Civil War began, John was often asked to preach in the camps of Confederate soldiers. He preached for nearly 20 years while still a slave, until finally he was given his freedom in April of 1865. 2 years later, 1867, John started the 6th Mount Zion Baptist Church in Richmond, in a small abandoned Confederate horse stable. The church began with 9 members, all former slaves. Great crowds of people, both black and white, came to hear this powerful preacher, and within 20 years, the church was averaging 2,000 people each Sunday morning. In 1878, John Jasper preached a sermon titled, "The Sun Do Move," which became his most famous sermon. He would preach it over 250 times throughout the country. The 6th Mount Zion Baptist Church built a building in 1887, which is still standing and where the church still meets. When Interstate 95 was being built in the 1950s, its projected path was going to require that the building be demolished. But when the people of the city insisted that this sacred site be preserved, the highway was rerouted, curving eastward for a short stretch. A historical marker stands in front of the building, commemorating the life and ministry of this remarkable man of God. John Jasper pastored the 6th Mount Zion Baptist Church for 30 years. He died on March 28, 1901, at 86 years of age. His last words were, "I have finished my work and am down at the river, looking for further orders." The New York Times reported the news of his death. A contemporary of John Jasper, William E. Hatcher, wrote John Jasper's biography. Christian, there is no obstacle that can prevent you from fulfilling God's will for you. Stay the course.